Africa, for a very long time, has been looked at as one region that is ready to explode. For a very long time, global figures, global organizations such as yours have tracked these numbers and seen that with the growing population, Africa is really, really ready to explode. But it doesn't really look like that anymore because there have been so many issues. But do you still share the same view that Africa's growth is now kind of stagnant?
Well, the reality is in 2014, Africa has experienced significant headwinds, whether it's caused by geopolitical concerns or political uncertainty in the continent itself. We've had elections in Nigeria, and there's been significant uncertainty in the run-up to that. We've had the Ebola crisis, low oil prices, weak commodity prices, volatile currencies. So there's no doubt in our mind that the headwinds have had an impact on the inflows of foreign direct investment in 2014. In fact, our survey says that in aggregate, FDI project numbers are down, but capital at the same time is in fact up. So I think the African rising narrative is still intact. We can explore more of that.
So in exploring more of that, you mentioned the fact that Nigeria being the largest in Africa, accounting for close to 171 million and counting, held elections that was rife with a lot of uncertainties. But now that we have this new administration, what impression do you think that the investing public, particularly the foreigners, the much needed FDIs that we're hoping to come into the economy, will be looking at right now?
So I think the successful and peaceful elections in Nigeria is a positive story not only for Nigeria but for Africa as a whole. It's a sign of the democratic process in actual motion. So there's no doubt that what it does is it adds a lot more confidence to the level of stability, predictability of investments in the African continent. The reality though is Africa is at an inflection point. Given that FDI project numbers were down year on year, and this is the second consecutive year that investments have been down, African governments are going to have to make some very deliberate choices about how they position themselves to attract foreign direct investment. I think the important thing to realize is we now compete for capital. We compete with other emerging markets of the world, and capital is not simply going to come because we have abundant oil and natural resources.
But then, let's also remember that at the time, the president, gave his inaugural speech, May 29, he talked about the fact that he wants to see more participation of foreign direct investment into the country. And we're looking at a situation where, like you've already mentioned, there's strong headwinds and the rest of it, and Nigeria is not immune to all of this crisis that has been coming. But judging from what the President Buhari has said, and judging from his stance with regard to a lot of issues, especially fighting corruption, do you think that investors will have more confidence to come and invest, particularly going by the survey from Ernst & Young showing that Nigeria actually had very low FDIs in 2014?
So if we look at the trend in foreign direct investment, we have to firstly recognize that globally there's been a drop in this last year of about 3%. Africa as a whole had a drop of 8%. So in truth, it's the lowest drop of any region in the world. The biggest increases were actually in North America and in Asia. So I think it's important to put the drop in context. Then if we look, there's also been a significant shift between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. North Africa is starting to re-emerge and investments are going back into that market. Sub-Saharan Africa has struggled in this last year. We've had drops in FDI projects in West Africa, East Africa and Southern. So there's no doubt that there's a lot more to do in the Sub-Saharan region to ensure that we keep attracting FDI. Positively, Sub-Saharan Africa is still growing at 5% GDP per annum, which makes it the second fastest growth region in the world. We now need to build on that.
But building on it, let's focus on Nigeria in particular.
Right. So today we have a new government in Nigeria. If we listen to investors, we ask them the question, what are the barriers to investing? So what is it that government needs to deal with? The first thing they talk about is political uncertainty or political instability. So the first thing that the president can do, the government can do, is add that certainty and that sustainability. So what are the new laws? Who are the new ministers? What is the vision plan for Nigeria? And then ensure that there's consistency of actions behind those plans. The second thing that investors told us about is their concerns around corruption. The President has been very vocal about his position on corruption, but we need to see more than just voice. We need to see action. We need to see some real commitment to stamp out corruption. The third thing that investors tell us about is they want more done on infrastructure. We need growth-enabling infrastructure. So that talks to power generation, needs to be fast-tracked. We need more done on the ports, on the rail networks, so supply chains can work more efficiently and products can get to actual consumers. Investors also tell us that they're looking for more transparency in laws, regulations, taxes. So this is an area where governments need to be consistent in what they're doing from year to year.
Well, then what can governments and the private sector do to deal with these issues that we've talked about, the issues of commodity price fluctuations, we've seen mounting public debt, we've seen development challenges, and we've seen terrorism?
Firstly, the way you've asked that question is absolutely right. Government cannot do this on their own. The private sector cannot do it on its own. This is a combination. It has to be of business and government working together. As economies open themselves up to the global markets, they will be exposed to currency fluctuation. You will be exposed to the trade performance of other markets of the world. This is what comes with a globalized economy. At the same time, globalizing your domestic economy creates opportunity for foreign direct investment. And this is what business and government in Nigeria need to do, work hand in hand to make sure you're telling a consistent story of the opportunity in Nigeria and using that to attract capital into that market, into some of the power projects, entrepreneurship projects, etc., that grow that economy.
Yes, it actually got me thinking that a lot of times most governments have looked at why can't we have economic growth and social inclusion working hand in hand, to give that much needed development and growth in the country. Why is it always such an impossible task to achieve?
And that's something we'll talk about in our 2015 attractiveness survey. There are really a few priorities that we think the private sector working with government need to think about very carefully. The first is what we describe as shared value. And shared value for business is about how do you pursue profit and growth, but with purpose. And when we talk of purpose, we're really talking about how do you bring communities along with you? How do you invest in society as well? Which is what government's agenda is. How do we lift people out of their poverty situation? The second thing is infrastructure. I think recognizing that government doesn't have the funding, it doesn't have the know-how which the private sector has. So private sector needs to work with government to make sure that they're putting the capacity behind funding and delivering against those infrastructure projects.
2015 is supposed to have been the deadline for the achievement and attainment of Millennium Development Goals, and one of such was to eradicate poverty. And that's one of the things that's going to feature at this year's World Economic Forum. But does it look like, realistically, that poverty is ever going to be eradicated in Africa, not to even mention in Nigeria?
So the singular way we need to focus on poverty is fundamentally we need to grow economies and we need to create jobs and we need to create access and opportunity for people to get economically participating. If we look at the population of Africa today, just over 1 billion, the expectations is by 2050 it'll be just over 2 billion with an average age of around 19. Now that is an extremely young population, and what it says is if we're not growing and investing in economies today, we will not create jobs for this new generation that will come over the next 30 years, and we'll not escape the poverty trap.
It just seems as if everybody is saying the same thing. This, what you've just said now, people have said it year in, year out. There have been plans, and it seems as if you're just making plans. You're not giving, you're not designating action points to people or to a parastatal or to the sector in particular. Focus on this thing. Let's try to create more jobs. Let's try to have a more people inclusive, economic growth. it's just as if it's just always been talk.
And absolutely right. And this is what foreign investors are telling us as well. They're saying the single biggest obstacle to investment is the political uncertainty. And what they're talking about there is the lack of consistency behind strategies. Many governments have put out vision strategies, Vision 2030, Vision 2025. What we're not seeing is programs, investments, capacity behind those strategies. We've got a number of vision statements for Africa. What we need to do is business and government working together to actually put projects to work, because that's when it all becomes real.
This week is the World Economic Forum Africa meeting here in Cape Town, South Africa. What are your expectations? Is it going to just be more talk? Because this year's theme is actually very interesting. They're reimagining the future of Africa.
Well, I think it's an interesting theme, reimagining Africa. In our view, Africa today is at an inflection point. And I say this because we've had 10 or 15 years of sustained growth. We've had growth in foreign direct investment projects and capital. However, in the last 2 years, we've seen FDI projects reduce. And there's no doubt that today African governments are going to have to make choices if we're going to continue to attract the levels of FDI we need to make the investments in Africa, infrastructure, to create the job opportunities. So reimagining is interesting, but I think what we need now is action to deliver against agreed visions in the first place.
Thank you so much, Arjun, for speaking with us.
Thank you very much.